super cheap HTMA. And I'll post the link below. So this deal is on until Monday. Definitely check it out. So HTMAs, let's talk about why I love HTMAs. So I have done a ton of different functional medicine tests. I love them all. I offer a ton of different functional medicine tests. The Dutch hormone test is awesome. I'm super obsessed with the GI map, but I'm also in love with hair, tissue, and mineral analysis. And not a lot of functional health practitioners talk about this test. It's super hard to read. You have to know what you're doing because you can't just look at each mineral individually. You have to know the pattern of minerals because there's a whole pattern that goes on. And so because of that, it's not a well offered test, but it provides you with amazing information. And for me, when I ran this test, it was a huge piece of my clinical puzzle. And when I started to supplement for it, I saw changes almost immediately. So it was amazing. And the reason why I like the HTMA is it provides a basis, kind of the foundation for your body to do healing for the rest of your protocol. So if you have gut issues or adrenal issues, like understanding what your body's ability, like energy level is through the different ratios and whether you're copper toxic is actually really, really important because when you start to rehydrate the body, when we look at the sodium and potassium levels of the body, when we start to rehydrate the body, when we start to look at copper toxicity and start to detox that and balance out the minerals, then we see the body enters into a state where it's now ready to heal. So we're removing super big roadblocks that can prevent you from being successful in other aspects of healing. So 3 reasons why it's important to do an HTMA. So one is it's going to determine if you're copper toxic. So this is pretty much for me, it's the big one. So most women are copper toxic and don't know it. When I heard about copper toxicity, I had no idea what it was. Initially, I thought copper was a metal. That's a little embarrassing. It's not a metal; it's a mineral. It's balanced with zinc. So you want to see zinc and copper in a balance. But what happens is with copper piping in our water system, with women taking the pill and IUDs, it's gonna shoot estrogen up. When estrogen's high or when your body has copper exposure, it's gonna start to store the excess copper in your tissues. And this is going to create a copper dominance issue. And then it's going to create low zinc and you're going to see a whole host of issues. So lots of women have these issues, and they think, it's just PMS, it's just hormone imbalance, possibly. But it's also probably copper toxicity. So for me, it was like insane anxiety. So, my copper toxicity was actually caused by pyrrole disorder. So it's a disorder associated with, tick-borne illnesses like Lyme, where it dumps zinc from your body. So my copper just like went through the roof and I was experiencing insane anxiety. So racing thoughts, couldn't sleep at night, couldn't focus, huge amounts of brain fog, crazy PMS. I was also had a calcium shell going on. So when you have copper toxicity, what's going to happen is it's going to start to pull calcium from your bones, and the calcium deposits in your soft tissue instead, and it creates a shell around your cells. And so the shell around your cells causes a lot of symptoms of depression. So you might have been interested in stuff but weren't interested anymore. So for me, I didn't even want to do arts and crafts. I didn't want to bake, and I was like super artsy and crafty. So I was like, what is going on? And I knew it had something to do with the tick-borne stuff that I had, but I couldn't quite figure out the mechanism. And then when I read about calcium shells and copper toxicity, I was like, oh, that's what it is. Basically, the calcium shell causes, it prevents nutrients from getting into your cells and stuff from getting out of your cells. And so it kind of, you emulate that emotionally. And so when I started taking vitamin A within a couple of weeks, couple of days, I noticed a huge difference, and I was like emotionally started to open up again. And I was like, oh, there I am. So if you don't recognize yourself, if you're feeling super burnt out, and if you have depression, actually, this is definitely a test that you want to do. If you've been on the pill, if you've been on IUD, you also want to do this test. Lots of symptoms of copper toxicity, depression, hypothyroid issues, racing mind, as I talked about, tired but wired. I had this. I was the most productive I think I've ever been, and least productive at the same time when I had copper toxicity because I was driven. I couldn't sit still. Irritable, difficulty concentrating, emotional numbness, ruminating negative thoughts, yeast infections. We'll get to the gut issues in a second with copper toxicity. Lack of sex drive, insomnia, increased PMS, chocolate cravings. So this is an interesting one. So if you crave chocolate, so I was obsessed with chocolate. It was my favorite, and I noticed my symptoms worsened after I ate it. And this is because what happens when you're copper toxic is it's going to store copper in your cells, and then the copper is going to be bio-unavailable. So basically, your liver creates ceruloplasm, and ceruloplasm carries about 90% of the copper around the body, so that you can use it. But when you're copper toxic, the excess copper is going to wear on your adrenals. So it's going to cause adrenal fatigue. And when it's wearing on your adrenals, the adrenals aren't really going to be able to produce aldosterone, and it's also going to prevent the production of ceruloplasm. So you're not going to have any bioavailable copper. So I kind of liken it to being you're in the middle of an ocean and you're dying of thirst. And so that's what your body's like with copper toxicity. So you have all this copper in your body, but your body actually can't use it. It's not in an available form. And so a lot of the symptoms that I read are pretty much the symptoms of copper deficiency. But you're not deficient in copper, so don't take it. You have to actually start to pull the copper from your body. And when you start to pull the copper from your body, your adrenals heal. Then you can use the ceruloplasm properly, create a lot of it, and then your body can start using the copper again. So it's a little bit complex. So that's why you're craving the chocolate, because your body's craving a bioavailable copper form. Yeast infections. So this is with gut issues. So gut issues is actually chronic gut issues is a sign of copper toxicity. So I had this. I would, test with a GI map and clear it out, and then it would come right back. And Lyme was a part of that for me. But another part of it was definitely, that I was copper toxic. So I wasn't making I didn't have enough zinc. So it's a balance, right? So when you have, high levels of copper, you're going to have low levels of zinc. So I actually was dumping zinc from my body, through a mechanism associated with Lyme. So that the high levels of copper, and the low levels of zinc, I didn't have enough zinc to make hydrochloric acid properly. And so because I didn't have enough hydrochloric acid, then this is going to cause chronic gut issues for a variety of reasons. So one is, if you don't have hydrochloric acid, you're not going to be able to break down your food properly. If you have undigested stool, then you can imagine it's going to cause a whole host of issues. It's going to be rough on the intestinal lining. It's going to lead to SIBO or IBS. It's going to create more infections because your stomach is acidic for a reason. So one is to break down your food, but the second function of that acidity is if you expose yourself to different, bacteria through food you're eating or meats, vegetables, if there's bacteria on it or parasites on it, you have a super acidic, well-functioning digestive system, it's going to wipe that shit out, unless it's crazy high concentrations or like a nasty, nasty bug. But it's going to wipe that out. And so then you're not going to have to deal with it anymore. But guess what? You're not producing stomach acid, so it becomes a party in your gut over and over and over again. So you can clear it out. But if your body's not producing enough stomach acid, then those infections are going to come back. And so you have to get to the underlying cause of it. For some people, it's H. pylori, which is an infection that does prevents the production of stomach acid. But for some people like me, it was actually chronically high copper toxicity. And yeast infections, actually, that comes in because, and when I think back, I had yeast infections when I was like 8. Maybe 10, but it was young. It was super young. I was probably copper toxic then, just a little bit, because actually, the bioavailable copper is a great way. It prevents yeast overgrowth. And so if you have copper, your copper's not available, then you're going to get that yeast overgrowth chronically. Mercury is another thing that leads to yeast overgrowth, but that's a whole other Facebook Live. So that's my whole spiel on copper toxicity. I could go on and on and on. But there's ways to sort it out. I'm actually pulling copper from my body. One of my colleagues and mentors is pulling copper. She's been pulling it for 2 years. But you start to you can feel yourself getting better and better and better as you're pulling this copper out. So if you have any of those symptoms, you want to do an HTMA. You want to get a good look at what's going on with your copper levels, and you want to start to use protocols to pull the copper out of your body so that it becomes more bioavailable and you're healing the adrenals. The second reason I like the HTMA is that you can screen for heavy metal exposure like lead and mercury. So this is going to show up like I have mercury. I've done this on a client, and that client had super high levels of mercury. So we started to look at exposure. Are you eating a bunch of fish? Because that's where you're going to get mercury from. Do you have mercury fillings in your mouth? So you can start to see where some of the other symptoms are going for there. The other thing is you can determine whether you're dehydrated at a cellular level. So this was actually huge for me. So just a little bit about my background. I used to run like 20 or 30K. I was like big into long distance running, and then I got sick. And one of the impacts of that sickness is I stopped being able to exercise pretty much at all. So I could do a 30-minute walk, and I would nap after a 30-minute walk. And this is the girl that used to run like 20K. And I knew it was related to the tick-borne illness that I had, but I couldn't figure out the mechanism. And then I did an HTMA and realized that my potassium was actually low intracellularly. So what was happening is, because I had high copper, I was pulling the potassium out of my cells. That's just part of the mineral pattern. When you get high copper, it starts to pull potassium from my cells. My body's in a high level of stress. And because I had thallium and cesium, these are heavy metals, I had toxicity. So they were sitting on my transporters, my sodium potassium transporters, and preventing the potassium from going back into my cells. So I was super dehydrated at a cellular level. And so I started to supplement for it. So I supplemented with potassium, high levels of potassium, with a protocol that I knew was very effective. And within weeks, my energy came back, which was huge because I'd been like getting worse and worse and worse over years. So to be able to say within weeks I saw a difference, that's pretty powerful. So if you have chronic fatigue, if you're exhausted all the time despite your sleeping, definitely want to do an HTMA. So I'm going to post the link below for the deal, and you can then check it out. So the deal comes with, it's probably the best deal that I'm going to offer on this test ever. So it comes with the testing protocol for you and a meeting with me to go over the results. So if you have any questions, message me or comment. And if you know anyone who struggles with this, tag them. Tag them if they've had crazy PMS, if they have anxiety, if they have chronic fatigue, and we'll get them sorted. Thanks for joining me on this Black Friday.